Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of Tales from Outer Space. And as always, I hope that you enjoy The Best Crewman I Ever Had, written by stonesdoorsbeatles. A digitized voice woke Toulouse from his drunken sleep with an indiscreet boatswain's whistle. Crewman 19 Toulouse, you are required in the captain's quarters. Gee, thanks, he grumbled, rubbing his throbbing head and swinging his 4 legs onto the cold metal floor. He tumbled out the door with just one arm in his jacket and stumbled down the red-lit corridor. She woke me up for third watch, after all I did. The loudspeaker on the wall crackled. Crewman 19 Toulouse, you are required in the captain's quarters. I know. Would you shut up, you piece of junk? He finally reached the hatch a few moments later and rasped his right claw against it a couple times, yawning lazily. The hatch slid open with a pneumatic hiss and he stepped through. The light was on in the captain's bedroom, illuminating a small rectangular portion of the darkened office. He could just barely spot her shadowed form sitting in the chair, turned around to face a false window and the stars fleeting past. You wanted to see me, Captain? You're a decent pilot, maybe even a good one, after you saved our hides yesterday. Who taught you those maneuvers? Well, he paused. I'm a no academy kid, he shrugged. I already knew that. Who taught you those maneuvers? Got it off smugglers, asteroid miners, anyone who picks up the sticks. Pirates, some. Captain turned around and switched on the lights. He shielded his eyes from the sudden flash and waited for them to adjust. At last, he could see her long face staring at him down, looking him over, judging him. Well, I won't delve any further into that, she decided. I suppose that I never gave you my gratitude for flying us out of that Golgol warp trap. After all that celebration afterwards, he replied, smiling at the memory of loud music and strong liquor. I'm happy to be of service. She jabbed a brawny finger at him. Don't let it get to your head, Toulouse. This isn't your shoddy miner pod, your slimy pirate skiff, your slippery drug runner. This is an exploratory vessel of the Grand Galactic Fleet. I let them drink to keep the morale up. Yes, ma'am, he answered, tightening his lips. And you're going to need to be more prompt the next time I send for you. Stars knows we'll be needing your skills when we finally penetrate Grolgar space, let alone those warp traps in Disputed Zone. And I don't want you snoring in your bunk when that happens. Yes, ma'am, is that all? He prepared to turn back towards the hatch. She gave the question some thought. No. Have a seat. I want to tell you something. The story. All right, he said tiredly, sliding into the chair beside the wall, but his ear holes perked up at her next question. Who do you think was the best crewman I ever had? Well, he chuckled. I'd rather not say. Out with it, your honest answer. Who? I'm tempted to say me, he grinned. And you'd be dead wrong, he frowned. The best crewman I ever had used to take that pilot seat of yours. But it wasn't his piloting that made him the best. It was his sacrifice. It was less the Captain Jeremina, your presence is requested on the bridge, and more the ambient roar of warp engines suddenly dying that awoke her from her sleep. She'd just given herself a few hours nap while the crew was executing a warp maneuver to the next planet in this uncharted system to survey, and now something had gone terribly wrong. She could feel it in her flesh and bones, the survival instinct kicking in. After 23 years with the fleet, the instinct had been honed. Perfected. It was never wrong. By the time she left the quarters, she was already buttoning the cuffs of her jacket. Her fears were confirmed when she opened the hatch to the bridge, greeting her with alarms ringing and light panels flashing emergency red. Captain, on deck! The security officer belched. The crew leapt from their stations, every flavor of sapience from all corners of the galaxy, each saluting her with whatever appendage they had, except for the one at the pilot's chair, who was furiously tapping on his touch display. What's wrong, pilot? She asked, brushing off the lapse in the officer's etiquette as she took her commander's chair. Captain, the warp engines are not engaging. The almost hairless creature hurriedly replied, tapping with his tiny, dexterous pink fingers. Why aren't they engaging, Nathaniel? She always had trouble sounding out his strange name. They're They're being inhibited by something. Something's restraining. Captain, sensors! A tentacled ensign cried. What do you have? She tersely answered. Grolgar attack craft directly behind us, 20 kilometers at 60 degrees down. Our intelligence says the craft is too small to power a warp trap, shouted the reptilian lieutenant. Is our intelligence faulty? No, ma'am, the pilot interjected. It isn't. That ship, it isn't preventing us from leaving. What is then? Captain, the sensor officer gasped. What is it? What sensors? There's a Golga cruiser coming over the horizon. Stars above, she muttered to herself. Boatswain, sound general quarters. Weapons, prepare firing solution for the attack craft. It was too late. Missiles inbound, announced the frightened sensors officer. Launch decoys, pilot, all stop, Jeromina barked. Aye, aye. They watched on in the main display as 2 chemical plumes barreled towards them within visual range. At the very last moment, they arced away, chasing the decoys instead. Once they had danced away, her voice quivered with emotion as she yelled, Pilot, get us out of here! Aye, aye, impulse to full, he answered far more coolly. They felt the sudden acceleration push them into their chairs as he burned for a higher orbit. More missiles inbound. Launch decoys. Missiles reacquired 10 kilometers out and closing. Launch again. No effect. Hold on! The pilot shouted as he switched instantly to retrograde thrusters, throwing them forward into their harnesses as the ship lurched backwards for a lower orbit. Why would he bother? She wondered. The missiles can outrun us, outturn us. The only hope is the decoys. She looked around at her crew. On their strange and alien faces, they all shared a common emotion. Fear for their lives. He's trying to reassure them, she realized. She ordered another round of decoys. The missiles finally disengaged, but there were more plumes not far behind. Too many plumes. Is this it? 23 years, 3 commands. I can't even take comfort in my death. The death of my crew. They can't use it for anything. They won't push the Golgar. A war with them would be a suicide for the Federation. Everyone knows they have better tech, the better ships, the better weapons. She was interrupted by freefall. For a moment, stretched into eternity, her restraints reeled back into her seat. But the whole ship had lurched with her. Her data panels froze up. New alarms blared across the main display. The alert read, Atmosphere breach detected. Bear hit! Masks on, she commanded, reaching into the seat pocket and retrieving an oxygen mask that she placed over her face. Her heavy breathing, almost panting, began to fuck up the glass. She looked down over her freezing and flickering data panel, banged it with her fist a few times, and then slid a pudgy finger across the report section. The damage report lit the entire warp section black, and the rest of the ship was a hodgepodge of red and orange. Captain, the missiles are arcing away. They're not going after our decoys. They're just self-detonating, crackled the sensors officer in her ear. Why would they do that? Asked the crewman's voice from the other ear. Because they want to capture us. Study us, she concluded. We've been disabled. No crew comes back from a Golgar boarding. Our only chance now is to escape. She opened her communications panel. Engineering, bridge, I need a systems report. Systems aren't your problem, ma'am, came the frantic reply. We've got 5 minute stops before we blow. Blow? Uncontrolled detonation. Engine 3's busted of its cooling frame and overheating. We can't get in there and use the manual shutdown. The whole thing's practically melting. Once it hits 2,000 degrees, those engines will go critical. Taking us with them. Captain, ma'am, engineering shouted through the speaker, exasperated. We ought to abandon ship. We'll be annihilated if we don't go now. There'll be no talk of abandoning ship, she barked. Stand by your station and await further orders. But, ma'am, she cut the channel before he could finish and rubbed her temples with a sigh. Well, if we're gonna die, we could take the Golgar with us. Sensors, how far is the Golgar attack craft from our position? She asked. 20 kilometers, ma'am, and getting closer. How large of an explosion would a triple warp engine detonation be? Ma'am, you heard me. You can't. You don't think. I do. Now, Lieutenant, how large of an explosion would it be? 63 cubic kilometers. Enough to take them with us, the bridge officer admitted. She sat back in her chair, contemplative. Now was the time for her heroic speech, something to fill every sapient of the ship with pride as they went to their deaths. She had almost slipped a finger over the intercom button before she was interrupted by the pilot, unbuckled from his harness and looming over her. "There's no need for that, Captain," he said without emotion. "We're going to die in a tunnel. We may as well take the Galgal with us and die as heroes," she reassured him. "Take your seat, we aren't. What makes you so sure? Call it instinct," he smiled. "Instinct?" He stepped over to the hatch. He looked at the security officer. "Open it for me. I'm going to engineering." "What are you doing in the tunnel?" asked the captain. He turned to face the whole bridge. "I'm willing to bet it takes the Grolgar a lot of power to run those warp traps on that cruiser. Not nearly as much as a warp travel, but a good fraction. They've got pretty good sensors too, because they wouldn't have it on if they didn't know that we were already here. They know we're crippled with those sensors. They don't know that we're going to blow, but they're pretty sure that we aren't warping anywhere soon. Under any normal circumstances, that would be true. But they didn't count on me. Open the hatch." The security officer looked anxiously over at the captain for an answer. She nodded cautiously. He regretfully ran a claw over his panel, and the hatch hissed open. The corridor, red with emergency lighting, sparked and groaned with twisting, shearing metal. He walked with purpose down the hall. They watched him pass through the next bulkhead, then found him on the video monitors and followed his progress from there. He made it to engineering, pausing a moment to take in the desolate scene, the wreckage and debris, the wounded crewmates around him, and a few dead ones. He was stopped by the chief of engineering at the hatch to the warp engines. "You can't go in there, human. You have any idea how hot it is in there? It'll melt your skin off. You'll die." "We're all going to die. I'll just die sooner," he curtly replied. The chief of engineering backed away, more afraid of him than the heat. He opened the hatch and stared for a moment into the bright orange oven, arm raised over his forehead, preparing himself. Then he turned away, looking instead straight into their monitor, his eyes looking back into theirs on the bridge. "Listen closely. When I throw the manual shutdown, power up engines 1 and 2. The course is already plotted. Once you're away from the Grolgar, you can plot a new course for the closest outpost." He looked back through the hatch and then back at them. "Good luck." Then he stepped into the pyre. They could barely make him out in the smoke on the last working monitor. His pants around his ankles had caught fire. His boots were dribbling melted fabric onto the floor. He had his arms raised around his face, futilely shielding it from the blast furnace around him. He stumbled through the dark haze, bumping into equipment and scorching himself on it. He grew slower and slower the closer and closer he got to engine 3. They could see the heat radiating off it from the video monitor. The cylindrical core had fallen haphazardly out of its bent frame and rested on the floor in flames. On its spine was a manual shutdown. He stopped warily and accidentally opened his eyes. They heard his scream as his coronas burned off. He was blinded, but somehow he did not collapse. He did not give up. He felt around, jacket over his hands for the core. The jacket burst into flames as soon as he touched the room. It didn't matter to him. He clambered on top in a hurry, almost slipping off in a frightful moment before regaining his balance. He was crawling on his hands and knees, now slower than a snail, burdened by unseen, crushing weight of pain. They could see his white teeth. He wasn't grinning. He was grinding them together and biting his lip to stem the shock to his system. At last, he made it to the manual shutdown, a massive lever which had to be lifted and flipped to shut down the engine. It was as large as his torso, and took a tool to do. Many averted their gaze. He had no chance, already so weakened by the heat, to flip that switch. But they could hear Amongst the crackling flames, a grunt and a groan, a tremendous bellowing roar erupted from within him. A fire swept his body as he lifted the switch with titanic effort into the air and let it fall with gravity into place. The engine stopped glowing blue. Soon enough, on the captain's data panel, the light for engine 3 went out. The bridge cheered like animals. The census officer took the pilot's seat and selected engines 1 and 2, just as the Growlgore craft had crossed within 2 kilometers of their dying ship. They slipped into warp and to a planet at the far side of the system. The video monitor had burned up in the fire. The transmission was only static now. The cheers died, replaced with a somber trill. Some teared up. The captain dropped into the cushion of a chair and prayed for the first time in 23 years for the human that had saved her life. All of their lives. "What's the closest friendly outpost?" she asked, eyes still closed. "Starbase 1916A, 46.4 light years." "Can we make it that far?" She opened the link to the engineering again. "That's pushing it. I can give you one more jump within, say, 20 light years. We'll still need to extinguish those fires," the chief answered. "All right. Anything closer? Let's see. I've got a reported smuggler's den at 1902C, 19.8 light years," said the intelligence officer. "Smugglers? Well, I suppose they're better than nothing. Plot a course." "Aye, aye, ma'am." He was right, she thought, as the warp engines roared to life. They may have better tech, better ships, better weapons, but they certainly don't have a braver crew. "I've never even heard of anyone that crazy," Tulu exclaimed, "or a human." "Not many have. They aren't even part of the Federation. They're kept in a nature reserve, unless they're unfortunate enough to be abducted by smugglers or pirates, or worse," the captain muttered. "Well, maybe those smugglers helped you out," Tulu argued. "After all, he saved your lives. We could use about 100 of them." "You joke like him. You have his spirit, Tulu. It's not just me saying that. When the crew toasted you, I could see it in their eyes. They're toasting him too, wherever the stars put him." "You really think so, that I could be as brave as him?" "I know so. Now go get some sleep. You're taking first watch tomorrow." "Aye, aye, ma'am," he saluted with pride. End of story. The algorithm reckons you should be watching this video next, and I recommend that you should be always watching my video. So, click with energy! And yes, clicking that does help the channel. Thank you very much. I just want to quickly thank the T5 channel members and patrons. Alithia, Barky, Trygan95, Beautycure, Meridian 117, Cam Maxwell, Casper Arnholt, Jordan Bucksborn, Angry Marine, Albard and Gusta, Savage Patch Papa, and Arcadian.